My beloved child. Before your next breath becomes another ordinary moment, listen closely. Somewhere beyond what your eyes can measure, a single choice is quietly unfolding. It is not a choice of fear, but of attention. Imagine someone standing at the edge of a doorway, holding words they have carried for far too long, wondering if you will arrive before they lose the courage to speak. That is where this story begins. Not with certainty, but with a whisper that refuses to disappear. In this fictional tale, a soulmate's voice seems to reach across impossible distance, carrying one desperate plea: please, don't walk away before you hear my heart. The question is not whether destiny is shouting. The question is whether you are willing to stay long enough to hear what has been hidden beneath the silence. The air felt unusually still that evening. The wind that usually danced through the trees seemed to pause, as though nature itself had decided to listen. You stood alone, unaware that someone else, miles away, was staring through a rain-covered window with your name resting silently on their lips. They had rehearsed these words countless times, only to lose them each time fear won the battle. Every sunrise became another missed opportunity. Every sunset carried another regret. Yet tonight felt different. Something inside them whispered that waiting any longer would only bury the truth deeper. But what truth could be so heavy that it took every ounce of their strength simply to hold it? In this story, the heavens are not delivering commands or predictions. Instead, they become a backdrop for hope, reminding us that love often survives in the places where pride cannot. The soulmate in this tale remembered a promise they once made, not spoken aloud, but written quietly inside their heart. They had promised that if life ever pushed the two of you apart, they would find a way back before silence became permanent. Years had passed. Faces changed. Roads separated. Yet the promise never disappeared. It waited patiently, like an old melody that suddenly returns when everything else has become quiet. They reached for an old wooden box hidden inside a closet that had not been opened in years. Dust floated through the fading light as trembling hands lifted the lid. Inside were ordinary things that somehow carried extraordinary meaning: a faded photograph, a dried flower pressed between notebook pages, a train ticket whose ink had almost vanished, and a folded letter never sent. None of these objects held magical power. They held memories. And memories have a strange way of becoming louder than words whenever the heart grows tired of pretending. The letter was different from everything else. It had been rewritten dozens of times. Some pages were stained by tears. Others were crossed out in frustration. Each version ended with the same unfinished sentence: "If I ever lose the chance to tell you." The sentence always stopped there, as though completing it would make the possibility too real to survive. Tonight, however, they unfolded the paper once again. For the first time, they continued writing. "I was never afraid of loving you," the letter read. "I was afraid you would never understand why I disappeared." Those words echoed through the quiet room. Outside, thunder rolled gently across the horizon, not as a warning, but as a reminder that storms often arrive before the clearest skies. They closed their eyes and remembered the last conversation you shared. It wasn't filled with anger. It wasn't filled with blame. It was filled with unfinished sentences, interrupted by circumstances neither of you truly understood. Looking back, they realized the greatest distance between two people is not measured in miles. It is measured in everything left unsaid. Meanwhile, your own life had continued forward. New routines replaced old dreams. Smiles returned, though never exactly the same. There were moments when an unexpected song or familiar scent stirred something deep inside, only to disappear before you could understand why. You convinced yourself those feelings belonged to the past. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, a quiet part of your heart refused to lock that final door completely. The soulmate in this story believed they had protected you by staying away. What they never realized was that silence can sometimes wound more deeply than honesty. Every day they watched the calendar change, hoping tomorrow would somehow become easier. Tomorrow never did. Regret became heavier than fear. Hope became stronger than hesitation. Finally, they whispered into the empty room, "If there is still a path back, I have to take it now." Then something unexpected happened. As they prepared to seal the completed letter, another envelope slipped from beneath the wooden box. They stared at it in confusion because they had never seen it before. It was older than the others, its edges worn with time, its paper yellowed by years. Across the front, in handwriting they instantly recognized, were only 4 simple words. "For the day you return." Their heartbeat quickened. That handwriting was not theirs. And the person who had written it was someone they believed had taken an impossible secret to the grave many years ago. With trembling hands, they slowly reached for the forgotten envelope. But they had no idea that opening it would change everything they thought they knew about you, about themselves, and about the promise that had never truly been broken. The envelope felt strangely warm despite the cool air surrounding it, as though it had been waiting with quiet patience rather than forgotten by time. Your soulmate hesitated before breaking the fragile seal. Every instinct urged them to stop, yet something deeper insisted that this moment had been prepared long before either of you understood its meaning. When the paper finally unfolded, there was no dramatic prophecy, no impossible prediction. Instead, the first sentence carried the weight of simple truth. If you are reading this, it means fear kept you apart longer than love ever wanted. The room fell silent. Those words pierced every excuse they had repeated over the years. They had blamed timing. They had blamed distance. They had blamed circumstances beyond their control. But now they saw another possibility: that fear had quietly disguised itself as wisdom until it became impossible to tell the difference. The realization was painful, yet oddly freeing. If fear had built the walls, perhaps courage could still open the gate. But who had understood them so completely years before they even faced this choice? They continued reading. The unknown writer described 2 people who kept protecting one another without ever saying so aloud. One withdrew to avoid becoming a burden. The other learned to smile through unanswered questions, believing silence meant rejection instead of sacrifice. Neither heart intended harm. Both believed they were carrying the heavier burden alone. The tragedy wasn't the distance itself. It was the misunderstanding growing inside that distance, quietly rewriting memories neither of you deserved to lose. Outside, dawn slowly began replacing the darkness. Soft golden light slipped through the curtains, touching the old photograph lying beside the open letter. Your soulmate picked it up and noticed something they had overlooked countless times before. In the background of the picture stood an elderly stranger whose face had never seemed important. Yet now, after reading the mysterious message, they recognized the same person from another memory, a brief encounter years earlier, someone who had smiled knowingly before saying, "One day you'll understand that waiting and giving up are not the same thing." At the time those words sounded ordinary. Now they refused to leave their mind. A quiet determination replaced the uncertainty that had ruled them for so long. They realized they could no longer allow yesterday's fears to decide tomorrow's possibilities. Instead of asking whether reconciliation was guaranteed, they began asking a different question: what kind of person will I become if I never even try? That question changed everything. Hope was no longer tied to the outcome. It became tied to honesty. Meanwhile, in another place, your own morning unfolded with unusual stillness. Nothing extraordinary appeared to happen, yet everything felt subtly different. A forgotten melody drifted through a nearby cafe. A child laughed while chasing birds across a small park. An elderly couple walked hand in hand with quiet joy that required no explanation. These ordinary moments stirred something unexpected inside you. For reasons you couldn't explain, your heart felt as though it were preparing to remember something it had never truly forgotten. Back at the small wooden table, your soulmate reached the final page of the mysterious letter. There, tucked between the pages, rested a tiny key. No explanation. No label. Only one handwritten sentence beneath it. The door it belongs to is still waiting. Confusion returned. They searched every corner of the room but found no matching lock. The key wasn't for the wooden box. It wasn't for the desk drawer. It belonged somewhere else entirely. Then another memory surfaced, one almost erased by time. Years ago, during one peaceful afternoon together, you had both wandered through an abandoned countryside chapel. Hidden behind ivy-covered stone walls stood a weathered blue door that refused to open. Laughing, you had joked that perhaps it would only welcome people who returned with the right reason. Neither of you had another key. Neither of you ever went back. Until now. Your soulmate stared at the small key resting in their palm, realizing it matched the exact shape they remembered from that forgotten door. A place abandoned by nearly everyone, except memory itself. Without wasting another moment, they folded both letters carefully, slipped the key into their pocket, and stepped outside. The morning sky stretched endlessly ahead, beautiful and uncertain. They didn't know whether you would be there. They didn't know whether forgiveness still lived inside the space between your hearts. But somewhere beyond the rising sun waited a locked door, and perhaps the first real answer either of you had searched for in years. What they could not possibly know was that someone else had already arrived at that forgotten chapel before them. And that person was carrying a truth capable of rewriting the entire story. Morning mist curled gently around the old countryside road, softening every familiar landmark until the world seemed suspended between memory and possibility. Each step your soulmate took felt lighter than the one before, yet every heartbeat carried a quiet uncertainty. The destination was no longer simply a forgotten chapel. It had become the place where every unanswered question seemed to gather, waiting for someone brave enough to face them without demanding easy answers. When the weathered stone building finally appeared through the drifting fog, time seemed to slow. Ivy still climbed across its walls, though now it had grown thicker, wrapping the chapel in years of quiet solitude. The faded blue door remained exactly where memory had left it, worn by rain, sunlight, and countless changing seasons. But one detail immediately stopped your soulmate in their tracks. Fresh footprints covered the damp earth. Someone had arrived only moments earlier. The silence inside the chapel felt alive rather than empty. Sunlight streamed through cracked stained-glass windows, scattering fragments of color across the old wooden floor. At first, no one seemed to be there. Then a gentle voice broke the stillness. I wondered how long it would take. Standing near the front of the chapel was an elderly woman holding a small leather journal against her chest. Her expression carried neither surprise nor fear. Instead, it reflected the calm patience of someone who had been waiting without ever losing hope. She looked toward your soulmate with warm eyes that somehow felt familiar, though they had never met before. You've been expecting me, your soulmate asked quietly. She smiled, not because she possessed every answer, but because she understood the weight of the journey. I've been expecting someone willing to stop running. The words settled into the room with remarkable gentleness. Without another sentence, she extended the worn journal. Its cover was cracked with age, and its pages carried the scent of cedar and old paper. On the very first page was a date from many years ago, long before either of you believed your paths had truly crossed. The handwriting matched the mysterious letter. As the pages turned, an extraordinary story unfolded. The journal belonged to someone who had quietly observed countless human lives, recording moments when love almost disappeared, not because affection ended, but because misunderstandings quietly replaced honesty. Every chapter told of ordinary people standing at impossible crossroads, believing they had reached the end, only to discover that the truth had been waiting behind one final conversation they never thought to have. Then your soulmate reached a page where the writing suddenly changed. Instead of describing strangers, it described two people whose lives mirrored your own with startling accuracy. Not by name. Not by appearance. But by choices. One always carried guilt they never deserved. The other carried hope they never admitted. Together they became prisoners of assumptions neither had intended to create. Your soulmate looked up in disbelief. Who wrote this? The elderly woman lowered her eyes for a brief moment before answering. My brother. She paused, allowing the silence to breathe before continuing. He spent most of his life helping people reconcile after years of unnecessary separation. He believed that hearts rarely break because love disappears. They break because truth arrives too late. She gently touched the final pages of the journal. Before he passed away, he asked me to protect this place until the people described here finally returned. Your soulmate's hands trembled slightly. He knew we would come. He believed hope has remarkable patience. Outside, clouds slowly parted, allowing sunlight to spill across the chapel grounds. At nearly the same moment, many miles away, you found yourself changing plans without fully understanding why. An unexpected impulse drew you toward a quiet countryside road you hadn't visited in years. There was no voice calling your name. No miracle interrupted your day. Only a peaceful certainty that refusing the feeling would leave a question unanswered forever. Back inside the chapel, the elderly woman walked toward the faded blue door hidden behind the sanctuary. The tiny key fit perfectly into its ancient lock. With a soft click, the door opened. Beyond it wasn't treasure or mystery in the ordinary sense. It revealed a modest garden enclosed by old stone walls. Wildflowers swayed peacefully in the breeze. A wooden bench rested beneath a flowering tree whose branches stretched toward the morning sky. It was breathtaking not because it was grand, but because it felt untouched by hurry. Every flower seemed to whisper that healing grows quietly while people believe nothing is happening. At the center of the garden stood a simple stone marker. No names. Only one inscription. Love becomes strongest the moment two hearts choose truth over fear. Your soulmate stood motionless, realizing this entire journey had never been about discovering a hidden secret someone else kept. It had been about uncovering the courage both of you had unknowingly buried beneath years of silence. The elderly woman spoke one final time. Your story isn't waiting inside these walls anymore. She looked toward the narrow path leading away from the chapel. It's walking toward you. Confused, your soulmate turned. Far beyond the stone gate, a distant figure had just appeared at the end of the winding path. The morning light made it impossible to recognize their face. Only one thing was certain. With every step they took toward the chapel, the distance between two unfinished lives was finally beginning to disappear. And neither of you yet realized that the very first word spoken when your eyes met again would reveal a truth far greater than either heart had imagined. The figure on the winding path did not rush forward. Every step was measured, almost reverent, as though this place deserved quiet rather than excitement. Birds lifted gently from the tall grass, circling above before disappearing into the brightening sky. Time itself seemed to soften, giving each heartbeat room to be felt. Your soulmate stood near the stone gate, unable to look away. After carrying countless imagined reunions inside their mind, reality felt infinitely more fragile than fantasy. As the distance slowly disappeared, recognition arrived not through appearance but through something impossible to mistake: the familiar rhythm of another person's presence. Some people leave fingerprints on memories. Others leave them on the soul. Before a single word was spoken, both of you sensed that this meeting carried more than coincidence. It carried unfinished honesty that had waited patiently through every changing season. You stopped a few steps away. Neither of you reached out. Neither of you searched for dramatic speeches. Instead, there was a long, quiet silence unlike any silence you had shared before. Years earlier, silence had separated you. This silence invited truth. Finally, your soulmate smiled with gentle uncertainty. I've imagined this moment so many times, but every version I created was wrong. A faint smile crossed your face. So did I. Those 4 words dissolved a weight neither of you realized you had been carrying. The conversation did not begin with apologies or explanations. It began with recognition. Two people who had survived separate journeys now stood together, no longer trying to pretend those journeys had never changed them. After a while, you both wandered into the hidden garden behind the chapel. Morning light filtered through flowering branches, painting shifting patterns across the narrow stone path. The peaceful setting encouraged honesty in ways neither of you expected. You spoke about ordinary things: first places visited, dreams postponed, people who entered and quietly exited your lives. Yet beneath every sentence rested another conversation waiting to emerge. Eventually, your soulmate took a slow breath. There was something I convinced myself you would never understand. You listened without interruption. I thought leaving would protect you from the struggles I couldn't explain. I believed that if you saw me disappear, you'd eventually build a happier life than the one I could offer. You lowered your eyes for a moment before answering. Do you know what I believed? They gently shook their head. I believed I wasn't worth the truth. The words settled between you with startling honesty. Neither belief had ever been true. Yet both had quietly shaped years of unnecessary distance. Neither of you blamed the other. For the first time, both of you blamed fear itself. The realization brought unexpected peace. There was no villain hiding inside your story. No betrayal waiting to be uncovered. Only two hearts that loved imperfectly while believing sacrifice required silence. Understanding replaced suspicion. Compassion quietly replaced regret. The elderly woman remained near the chapel entrance, watching from afar with quiet contentment. She did not interrupt. Some conversations belong entirely to those brave enough to have them. Before leaving, however, she placed one final item upon the wooden bench. It was an old pocket watch. Its hands had stopped many years ago. Attached to it was a folded note. Curious, your soulmate opened it. Inside were only 2 sentences. The watch stopped at the exact moment one promise was broken. It will begin again when the promise is renewed, not with words, but with a choice. Neither of you understood. The watch refused to move. No matter how gently it was wound, its hands remained frozen. Then something unexpected happened. A distant church bell echoed across the valley. At the exact same moment, your phone vibrated. An unfamiliar message had arrived. There was no name. No number. Only one sentence. You have uncovered the past, but someone is about to test whether you've truly learned from it. Before either of you could react, another sound interrupted the peaceful morning. An engine approached along the narrow country road. A dark vehicle came to a slow stop outside the chapel gates. The driver stepped out holding a sealed envelope marked with both of your names. Their expression revealed nothing. But the moment your eyes fell upon that envelope, the pocket watch resting on the bench suddenly began to tick once again. And neither of you was prepared for what the letter inside was about to ask of your hearts. The driver approached without haste, treating the quiet grounds with unexpected respect. Morning sunlight reflected softly across the sealed envelope in their hands, making the names written across the front appear almost luminous. They offered no explanation, only a gentle nod before placing it into your soulmate's waiting hands. I was only asked to deliver this, the stranger said. Nothing more. With that, they returned to the vehicle and disappeared down the winding road, leaving behind nothing except fresh tire tracks and a silence that somehow felt fuller than before. For several moments, neither of you reached for the envelope. The moment no longer belonged to curiosity alone. It carried responsibility. There was an unspoken understanding that once those pages were opened, there would be no returning to the comforting uncertainty that had protected both of you for so long. Some truths ask to be discovered. Others ask whether we are prepared to live differently because of them. At last, your soulmate carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar. Its opening line was simple. If this message has reached both of you together, then you have already accomplished something extraordinary. You chose conversation before conclusion. Neither of you expected those words. The letter continued by describing something few people ever recognize in time. It spoke of relationships that quietly fade, not because love weakens, but because assumptions become louder than honest questions. Every sentence seemed less like advice and more like a mirror, reflecting moments both of you now understood from an entirely different perspective. Then the message changed. It no longer spoke about the past. It spoke about tomorrow. You now stand before a doorway that cannot be crossed by memory alone. Gratitude for yesterday is beautiful, but it cannot build a future. Only deliberate trust can do that. Your soulmate lowered the letter for a moment. What if we've learned too late? You looked toward the distant hills where sunlight now stretched across the landscape. Maybe the better question is, what if we're finally learning at the right time? Those words settled gently between you. For the first time, neither of you searched for guarantees. Instead, you found yourselves speaking openly about fears that had remained hidden for years. You admitted the nights when hope felt impossible. They admitted the moments they nearly reached out but convinced themselves you deserved someone stronger. Every confession removed another invisible barrier until conversation no longer felt difficult. It felt natural. As the hours passed, the hidden garden seemed transformed by your honesty. What once appeared simply peaceful now felt deeply alive. Bees wandered through blooming flowers. Gentle wind carried the scent of lavender across the stone paths. Even the old bench beneath the flowering tree seemed to belong to a story that had quietly waited for this exact afternoon. Then your attention returned to the pocket watch. Its hands had not merely started moving again. They were keeping perfect time. Curious, you turned it over. Neither of you had examined the back before. There, engraved into the silver surface with remarkable care, was a single date. Not from the past. From the future. It was tomorrow's date. Neither of you spoke. The impossible detail left the air suspended with quiet wonder rather than fear. Inside the cover rested another hidden inscription so small it was almost overlooked. When this day arrives, choose the path that asks for courage instead of comfort. Your soulmate looked at you, searching your expression. What does that even mean? Before either of you could begin imagining possibilities, footsteps echoed beyond the chapel walls. The elderly woman returned carrying a small wooden chest unlike the one you had seen earlier. She placed it gently between you. "I almost forgot," she said with a warm smile. "My brother asked me to give you this only after you both remembered how to listen instead of defend." She stepped back. "You've earned it." The chest contained no lock. No visible keyhole. Only an intricately carved symbol on its lid. The moment your fingertips brushed across that carving, the wood released a soft click. Inside rested a bundle of handwritten pages tied together with a faded blue ribbon. On the first page was a title. "The Life You Never Knew You Were Already Building Together." Your heartbeat quickened. How could someone have written about a future that had not yet unfolded? Your soulmate slowly untied the ribbon. The first page revealed only one paragraph before stopping abruptly. It described a decision the two of you would face within the next 24 hours, a decision so ordinary on the surface that most people would ignore it completely. Yet according to the pages, everything that followed would depend upon what you chose in that single unexpected moment. Just as your soulmate turned to read the next page, a powerful gust of wind swept through the garden, scattering every remaining page into the open sky. Hundreds of handwritten sheets lifted above the chapel like white birds taking flight. Some disappeared beyond the trees. Others drifted across the surrounding fields. One page landed at your feet. Another landed far beyond the stone wall, directly in front of someone who had quietly been watching the chapel from a distance all along. And the expression on that unseen observer's face revealed that they already knew exactly what was written there. The pages floated across the valley like scattered pieces of a forgotten melody, each carried by its own current of wind. Neither of you chased them immediately. There was something strangely beautiful about watching them disappear into places you could not control. For so long, both of you had tried to manage every outcome, predict every disappointment, and shield one another from uncertainty. Yet now the story itself seemed to whisper a different lesson: not everything precious is protected by being held too tightly. The elderly woman looked toward the open fields without alarm. "Some words are meant to be found," she said quietly. "Others are meant to find the person who is finally ready to understand them." Her calmness changed the atmosphere. Instead of panic, purpose filled the silence. Together, you and your soulmate stepped beyond the old stone walls, following different trails where the pages had drifted. It wasn't about recovering every sheet. It was about discovering why each one had landed where it did. You wandered through a meadow glowing beneath the afternoon sun until one page rested against the roots of an ancient oak tree. When you picked it up, you expected another prediction. Instead, you found a question. What would your life become if you stopped waiting for certainty before choosing love? There was no answer beneath it. Only empty space. As though the story itself refused to complete that sentence for you. Meanwhile, your soulmate followed another page that had settled beside a narrow stream. Their page carried no dramatic revelation either. It described a simple memory from childhood, one they had never shared with anyone. Reading it stirred emotions they believed had long disappeared. They suddenly understood that the habit of hiding difficult feelings had begun years before the two of you ever met. The silence that separated you had never truly started with your relationship. It had started with old fears they never learned to name. For the first time, they stopped blaming a single moment for everything that had happened. Healing rarely begins where pain becomes visible. It begins where pain first learns to hide. As the afternoon unfolded, more pages appeared in unexpected places. One rested beneath wildflowers. Another clung gently to the branches of a low tree. None of them revealed the future in extraordinary detail. Instead, each page invited reflection, asking quiet questions that gradually reshaped how both of you understood yourselves. By sunset, you returned to the chapel carrying only a handful of recovered pages. The elderly woman smiled. You found exactly the ones you needed. Your soulmate frowned slightly. But dozens are still missing. She nodded. And perhaps they're meant to remain that way. She explained that her brother had always believed no one should receive every answer at once. A life built entirely on certainty leaves no room for trust, compassion, or growth. The unwritten spaces between answers were not mistakes. They were invitations to walk forward together. Those words settled deeply within both of you. For the first time, the missing pages no longer felt like a loss. They felt like tomorrow. As evening painted the sky with shades of amber and violet, the three of you shared a quiet meal inside the old chapel. Conversation flowed naturally. There was laughter where regret once lived. Stories replaced assumptions. The weight that had followed both of you for years seemed lighter, not because every mystery had been solved, but because neither of you was carrying it alone anymore. Just before nightfall, the elderly woman disappeared briefly into another room. When she returned, she carried a small lantern crafted from aged brass. "This belonged to my brother," she said softly. "He lit it whenever someone reached the point where fear no longer made their decisions." She placed the lantern into your hands. Its flame burned steadily despite the evening breeze. Then she offered one final piece of guidance. "Tonight, follow the northern trail until the lantern goes out." Neither of you questioned her. The path wound gently through quiet hills beneath a sky filled with stars. Crickets sang from the tall grass, and the lantern's warm glow illuminated only a few steps ahead. It never revealed the entire road, only enough to keep moving. Hours passed. Then, without warning, the flame extinguished. Not from wind. Not from lack of fuel. It simply faded. You found yourself standing before a peaceful overlook where the valley stretched endlessly below. At the edge of the cliff stood a weathered stone monument neither of you had ever seen before. Carved into its surface were countless names. Not famous names. Ordinary ones. Beneath them was a single inscription. To those who chose honesty when silence seemed easier. Your soulmate slowly traced the words with trembling fingers. Then they noticed something impossible. At the very bottom of the monument, 2 empty spaces had already been carved. Waiting. As though they had always been reserved for names that had not yet been written. Before either of you could make sense of it, footsteps echoed from somewhere behind the monument. A calm voice emerged from the darkness. "I've been searching for you ever since the pages were scattered." The figure stepped into the moonlight carrying one final sheet of the manuscript. Unlike every other page, this one had never been folded. And across the top, in unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Read this together, only after you are both ready to hear the final truth." The stranger stepped forward with quiet humility, offering the final page without ceremony. There was no mystery in their expression, no hidden agenda waiting to be uncovered. They simply smiled, as though they had carried this single sheet for a very long time and were grateful its journey had finally reached its destination. "I was told this page could never belong to one person alone," they said softly. "It only reveals its meaning when 2 hearts choose to read it together." With steady hands, you and your soulmate unfolded the last page beneath the gentle glow of the moon. The words were beautifully simple. If you have reached this moment, you have already discovered the greatest truth this story could offer. Love was never asking either of you to be perfect. It was asking you to be honest. The distance was never your greatest enemy. Fear was. The silence was never your greatest burden. Assumptions were. Every unanswered question, every delayed conversation, every hidden tear brought you here not to punish you, but to teach you that healing begins the moment two people stop protecting themselves from the very truth that could set them free. Neither of you spoke for several moments. There was nothing left to defend. Nothing left to prove. The answers you had searched for were never hidden inside magical objects, forgotten letters, mysterious keys, or scattered pages. Those moments had simply guided you toward the courage to have the conversation that should have happened long ago. Your soulmate looked into your eyes with complete openness. I can't promise there will never be difficult days. You smiled through grateful tears. I don't need perfect days. You gently reached for their hand. I only need us to stop facing them alone. For the first time since your paths had crossed, hope no longer felt fragile. It felt steady. The elderly woman slowly joined you beneath the stars. Her face reflected peaceful satisfaction rather than triumph. My brother believed every meaningful story ends the same way, she said. You both listened closely. Not because every problem disappears, but because people become different from who they were when the story began. She was right. The two people standing beneath the night sky were no longer defined by regret. You had become people willing to ask difficult questions instead of making painful assumptions. People willing to remain present instead of disappearing behind fear. People willing to trust that honesty may feel vulnerable, but it is also where genuine peace begins. The stranger quietly placed the remaining recovered pages into the wooden chest. There is no need to search for the others anymore, they said. The missing pages belong to tomorrow. Those words felt surprisingly comforting. Not every chapter needed to be known in advance. Some of life's most meaningful moments arrive because they are lived, not because they are predicted. As dawn approached, the first rays of sunlight stretched across the valley. The old chapel stood peacefully behind you, no longer representing unanswered questions. It had become a symbol of something far more valuable, the place where silence finally gave way to understanding. The pocket watch rested comfortably in your soulmate's hand. Its gentle ticking continued. Not because time had been restored, but because both of you had chosen to move forward instead of remaining trapped by what could never be changed. Before leaving, you turned once more toward the stone monument. The two empty spaces remained exactly as they were. Untouched. The elderly woman noticed your curiosity and smiled. They were never waiting for names. She pointed toward the horizon where a new morning was beginning. They were waiting for choices. At that moment, you finally understood. Every day offers another blank space. Every conversation, every act of kindness, every moment of forgiveness becomes part of the story we choose to write together. The future is not carved by fate alone. It is shaped by the courage to love with sincerity, to listen with compassion, and to walk forward without allowing fear to speak louder than hope. And so this fictional journey comes to its end, not with the promise that every road will be easy, but with the reminder that the strongest relationships are not built by people who never struggle. They are built by people who choose truth, grace, patience, and understanding again and again. May your own heart always find the courage to replace assumptions with honest conversations, fear with faith, and regret with new beginnings. May you recognize the beauty that often grows quietly during seasons of waiting, and may hope continue to light your path even when tomorrow has not yet revealed itself. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of honesty and hope, consider sharing it with someone who may need a little encouragement today. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for the next fictional inspirational journey. Until next time, may peace, wisdom, and love walk beside you wherever your path may lead.